Indigenous peoples, local, and marginalized communities are increasingly recognized as being especially vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. They are, however, the fraction of human appropriators of biomass determining the lowest ecological impacts. As the impacts of climate change, industry, and conservation efforts continue, we recognize Indigenous and local communities as arbiters of effective change with unique worldviews, specialized environmental knowledge, and generational wisdom. Indigenous peoples live in and have special claims to territories that in many cases harbor exceptionally high levels of biodiversity. On a global basis, human cultural diversity is associated with the remaining concentrations of biodiversity. Both cultural diversity and biological diversity are endangered. Environmental degradation and biodiversity loss is occurring at alarming rates globally, but is happening at a much slower rate on Indigenous peoples' lands, according to the IPBES. Therefore, incorporation of Indigenous and local perspectives, knowledge, and understanding into environmental policy and scientific communities may be able to increase effectivity within these fields. To this end, we conducted interviews in Indigenous and local communities globally, specifically within the Ni Vanuatu community from Vanuatu, the Maori community from Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Ainu community from Japan, and the Sami community in Arctic Europe. Our interviews prioritized open-ended questions discussing ecological health, environmental dependence, the importance of Indigenous and local understanding, and the socioeconomic consequences of climate change, industry, and conservation. For time's sake today, I'll be showing you short introductions and snippets of transcribed interviews for insight into an Indigenous analysis of environmental degradation and conservation. I want to emphasize that I do not speak for any community featured here today, and that everything written is from a first-person perspective.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko ikurangi te maunga waipu te awa Ngāti Pūroti iwi, horota te waka, ko Peter Mataira ahau. E no ana ki au I Haula, Hawaii. Just want to say kia ora to everybody. My name is Peter. I currently live in Hawaii, and I teach at Hawaii Pacific University. And I actually grew up, born and bred in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I'm from the Ngāti Pū tribe.
I'm Eero Orpas from Finnish Lapland, and I'm 10th generation reindeer herder. Maybe there has been reindeer herding longer, but there is no written history before that. Forest industry, it has had a biggest impact for the reindeer herding because lost of the winter pastures that the reindeers have. And also, one of the main food for the reindeers in the autumn time is mushrooms. And the mushrooms, they live in symbiosis with the trees. And of course, when the trees are cut down, there's no mushrooms because they have not any trees to live with. And that has a really big impact to the reindeers. And nowadays, we can clearly see that when there is a year that there is poorly mushrooms, the average weight of the reindeer calves, when slaughtered, it can drop like 5 or 6 kilos. And in the good year, the average weight is about 24 kilos per reindeer calf. So it has a major impact for the economy of the reindeer herders. And the the wind parks, the huge towers and the big blades, they have such an impact for the reindeer herding that in the calving season, the reindeer mothers, they are a bit afraid of the spinning blades, so they want to flee the areas where the windmills are, and it has been already researched that it was something like about 7 to 10 kilometers from the windmills is the area where the reindeers don't want to give birth. So if you have a big wind park, and it can be like hundreds of hectares, and then you add that 6 to 10 kilometers around it, so it takes a huge part of the reindeer living areas out of the use. So it has also a really big impact. And the agriculture also made a huge impact for the reindeer herding when it came to the Lapland, and there was, and there still is, some collisions with the reindeer herders and the farmers, because when there is no food in the forest, if we have a really dry summer and there's no mushrooms in the autumn time, then the reindeers want to come to the farmlands, and of course they do some damage if the conditions are really bad, and there comes some collisions that we try to prevent by building the fences around the fields, which I think we have managed to do it quite well.
関根マヤセコロクレヘアン。ね、シシリムカペットホントムタン肉体ピパーシコタンコアパマカクネは、神奈川県オタンカンピネツオルンカラパコロマカナクキヤクナピリカのアイのイタクピラセヤシカイカケコシラムスイパクネラムキリアンナ。So, my name is Maya Sekine. I was born in small town called Nibutani in Hokkaido, where 70 to 80% of the population are Ainu. There are about 300 residents. Ainu culture remains strong there, and it is a place where we Ainu can learn about our culture and traditional stories. So in the past, Ainu could eat salmon anytime. So our staple food was salmon and deer. But salmon has been over-captured because of the fishing industry. Also, deers are over-hunting. So it has become more difficult to get not only food, so also materials for traditional craft are lost. So the ecosystems have been changed, and bears come down to where people live now. So sometimes city side can see the bear. Bears also lost their natural habitat because the mountain doesn't have food for them. So I think this is caused by industrial human activities, not thinking about the balance with nature.
Rohamai Kako. My name is Vince Okada Koiro. I'm connected here today from Honolulu, Hawaii. I was born and raised in Japan. I did my PhD research on Ainu, the Japanese policies and educations around Japanese indigenous people. In modern era as well, the Japanese government built like dams as countermeasures to like natural disasters. Because of the population increase, many areas were developed as residential areas. I'm sure that there are lots of wood cutting in the forest as well. So there was an impact to the ecosystem, which I really relied on for survival.
With all of the interviews that we conducted, what became very apparent was the breadth of the socioeconomic, cultural, and political impacts that both environmental degradation and conservation efforts had on Indigenous and local communities. These communities, however, often have specialized knowledge of their local flora and fauna and unique ecological management techniques that our current models do not properly recognize. I've been asked to leave you all with this. Over the course of our discussions, a reference was made to Dr. A.J. Ernst's comments at the Indigenous Evaluation Conference, where he spoke as the Executive Director of the National American Council on Excellence. Dr. Ernst asked, which is valued most today, 1,000 years of ancient wisdom or a 3-year clinical trial? Thank you so much.